Hello there, you're watching All 24 News World News Program, and these are tonight's top stories. Occupation forces violate the Gaza ceasefire, leaving scores dead and wounded in Shujaiyah, while Palestinians endure an intensifying siege across the West Bank. And for the first time, a European documentary sheds light on France's colonial atrocities, revealing harrowing testimonies and banned chemical weapons used during Algeria's War of Liberation. Also in our news, in Morocco, civic movements demand accountability for mismanaged public money, triggering renewed scrutiny of the post-quake reconstruction budget. And later on, the US president raises the specter of force over Iran's nuclear file. Iran refuses to negotiate under pressure as Washington tightens sanctions, this time extending them to Iraq. Stay tuned to the details shortly. Welcome back to the details. Kicking off our news tonight, the humanitarian toll in Gaza continues to mount. The Palestinian Health Ministry reports 5 more lives lost and 37 injured in the past 24 hours alone. This brings the total number of martyrs since October 7, 2023 to a staggering 48,458, with over 111,000 wounded. Countless others remain trapped beneath the rubble. Meanwhile, media sources say 2 more victims succumbed to Zionist artillery fire in Shujaiyah, east of Gaza City, as they inspected their damaged homes. 3 others were wounded and taken to the Baptist hospital. In related developments, another group of wounded and sick Palestinians has been evacuated from Gaza for treatment abroad. Local media report that 40 patients accompanied by relatives crossed through Rafah in ambulances as part of the ongoing ceasefire agreement. This marks the 37th such medical transfer from the Strip. Meanwhile, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is growing ever more dire as severe shortages of food and basic supplies push families to the brink. During the month of Ramadan, long queues have become a daily reality as residents struggle to secure a simple iftar meal. Salman Nasib has the full story.
The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is growing more desperate by the day. Deprived of food, water, and basic essentials, Palestinians are struggling to survive under a suffocating blockade imposed by the Zionist entity. In Khan Younis, long queues stretch in front of bakeries where people wait for hours just to get a single bag of bread, often not enough to feed an entire family.
We're only allowed 1 bag of bread. The borders are closed. Everything is closed. What can we do? Each person gets just half a loaf, half a pita bread. I leave home at 6 a.m. and return at 1 p.m. just for that. We're in crisis. We are powerless.
Shortages are spiraling out of control, and the impact is particularly devastating during the holy month of Ramadan, where families are struggling to prepare even the simplest meals for iftar and suhoor.
We're humiliated. I came at 8 a.m. and now it's 11 and the bakery is still closed. We've been waiting. We've waited for hours. There's still no bread. How am I supposed to feed my children? I can't even afford diapers for my baby. This is not a life. Honestly, it's unbearable. Open the borders and help us. Our situation is dire. We live in tents. Our homes are destroyed. I'm a widow raising my children alone. I call on all Muslims to stand with the Palestinian people.
Aid agencies and human rights groups have repeatedly accused the Zionist entity of deliberately obstructing humanitarian aid and using starvation as a weapon of war, a violation of international law during what many are now calling a genocide.
Turning to political developments now, senior Hamas official Mahmoud Mardawi dismissed reports suggesting the group is open to a temporary truce in Gaza, reaffirming Hamas's commitment to the current agreement and urging progress on the second phase of negotiations. Meanwhile, fellow leader Tahir Nannu confirmed talks with U.S. envoy Adam Bowler centered on the release of a dual nationality detainee. He underscored Hamas's readiness to engage while insisting the group's priority remains the interests of the Palestinian people. Meanwhile, over the occupied West Bank, on Sunday, Zionist occupation forces stormed Al-Ahli hospital in Al-Khalil. According to the Palestinian Information Center, troops raided medical departments, detained staff, and seized surveillance footage. The Palestinian Ministry of Health strongly condemned the assault, calling on the international community and human rights groups to urgently intervene and safeguard Palestine's health sector from continued violations. Also making headlines tonight, tensions flared again in the occupied West Bank as Zionist forces stormed the Farah camp south of Tobas. Media reports say special units first infiltrated the area, followed by heavy military reinforcements. Troops raided homes, made arrests, while drones hovered overhead. And the raids didn't stop there. At dawn Sunday, Zionist occupation forces launched fresh raids across several cities and towns in the occupied West Bank. 2 freed prisoners were arrested, while thousands of Palestinians were blocked from accessing their homes. Authorities also issued 28 new arrest orders, either under administrative detention or on alleged security grounds, ranging from 2 to 6 months, according to the Prisoners Commission and the Palestinian Prisoners Club. Elsewhere in the region, tensions escalated along the Lebanese border as Zionist occupation forces opened fire during a funeral in Kafr Kila Marja'iyun district. A Lebanese soldier was martyred, reportedly after suffering a fatal heart attack amid the gunfire, while 2 civilians were injured, 1 critically. The mourners had gathered to honor 25 martyrs, according to the Lebanese news agency. To North Africa now, the documentary Algeria Special Weapons Units sheds light on a grim and little-known chapter of France's colonial past during the Algerian Liberation Revolution. Through powerful testimonies and chilling evidence, it uncovers the use of chemical weapons and the creation of special units designed to exterminate Algerians. Yassine Arikti reports now.
A new and disturbing chapter of French colonial atrocities in Algeria is coming to light through a powerful documentary by French filmmaker Claire Billet titled Algeria Special Weapons Units. This investigative film sheds light on one of the most horrifying strategies employed by colonial France during Algeria's War of National Liberation, the use of toxic chemical weapons to eliminate resistance fighters hiding in mountain cave shelters. Drawing from historical archives, eyewitness testimonies from both French soldiers and Algerian survivors, and the extensive research of historian Christophe Lafayette, the documentary uncovers the scale and brutality of this chemical warfare campaign. Despite France being one of the first countries to sign international treaties banning chemical weapons, the colonial authorities reportedly authorized mass experimentation and deadly gas attacks as early as 1956 with the creation of a special weapons unit. These units were responsible for selecting specific toxic agents, determining application methods, and deploying specially trained personnel to carry out these covert operations. Over 100 such units were reportedly active across Algeria. According to historian Lafayette, between 8,000 and 10,000 gas attacks were carried out during the war. 440 of them documented, painting an ugly picture of a systematic campaign of extermination. The documentary highlights one of the most chilling incidents, the Gare Ben Ghatour massacre in the Arras region, where 150 civilians were trapped and suffocated during a gas bombing on March 22, 1959. Survivors of the Garbingatu atrocity recall the terrifying moments of suffocation and despair, providing first-hand accounts of this little-known war crime. The revelations in this documentary are described as just a drop in the ocean of French colonial crimes in Algeria, a brutal legacy of massacres, torture and chemical warfare, all aimed at crushing a people's struggle for independence. With compelling evidence and a bold narrative, Algeria's Special Weapons Unit forces France and the world to confront a dark and painful truth, long buried in the shadows of colonial history.
Staying with that topic, French historian Christophe Lafay has reportedly faced harassment from French authorities who blocked his access to colonial archives, an apparent attempt to obscure France's violent legacy in Algeria. According to the Algerian news agency, both Lafay and the director of the documentary on France's use of poison gases during the Algerian Liberation Revolution encountered administrative hurdles, highlighting efforts to suppress a dark chapter that once drew international condemnation. And still in connection with colonial France, French journalist Jean-Michel Apathier has officially resigned from RTL following a temporary suspension of remarks comparing Nazi brutality to French colonialism in Algeria. In a statement posted Sunday on X platform, the veteran journalist confirmed his departure and reiterated his commitment to uncovering what he called the horrific crimes and shameful legacy of France's colonial rule in Algeria. Back home now, at a cabinet meeting chaired by President Abdelmajid Tebboune, Algeria announced key economic and social measures ahead of Eid al-Adha. The president ordered an international consultation to import nearly 1 million heads of livestock, instructing the agriculture minister to set price ceilings and coordinate with public cooperatives for fair distribution. He also urged stronger youth training in modern farming techniques. Tebboune further launched a major railway project linking Lagouat, Tamrast, and the Mniati Mimoun Adrar line, seen as a catalyst for economic growth and social development. He also called for accelerating the digital integration of national tax data to boost transparency and ease procedures for investors. To neighboring Morocco now, Moroccan human rights groups are pressing Mexican authorities to account for over $2.2 billion allocated for rebuilding homes damaged by the recent earthquake. The Moroccan Democratic Organization for Human Rights also raised alarm over worsening conditions in the House region, where cold and rain have deepened the suffering of victims amid sluggish reconstruction efforts.
The recent cold and rain have worsened the suffering of those in the House region, still living in tents over a year after the devastating Atlas earthquake. The gap between the promises made and the reality on the ground is glaring, with no clear humanitarian or legal responsibility taken by officials. We urge the relevant authorities to fulfill their promises, speed up reconstruction efforts, and hold those accountable for failing to meet their commitments.
Similarly, adding to the outcry, a Moroccan watchdog is demanding answers over squandered development funds in the House region. During a recent visit, Mohamed Ghallousi, head of the Moroccan Association for the Protection of Public Money, called for transparency and accountability, urging officials to disclose how the allocated budgets were spent. He warned that the ongoing mismanagement has left the region isolated and its residents in dire conditions.
A number of municipalities in El House region and the regional councils need to be held accountable, with the report submitted to the Ministry of the Interior and the Supreme Court of Accounts. Large amounts of public funds have completely disappeared from this region. Imagine that the roads leading to these areas are roads to death. A budget of 45 billion dirhams were allocated from the fund to support these remote areas and villages. Yet we have no idea where this 45 billion dirhams went. Where did it evaporate? People today are complaining struggling and suffering immensely. People are still living as if in the 16th century, caught between the harshness of nature, the difficult climate conditions and the cruelty of those managing public affairs in this dear region of our country. Today, Morocco is moving at two contradictory paces. One is the pace of the underdeveloped Morocco in these marginalized areas, suffering from exclusion, fear of displacement, poverty, fragility, social deprivation, unemployment, illiteracy, and everything else you can imagine. The other is the pace of regions equipped with infrastructure, services, and public facilities.
Turning now to the international scene, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has dismissed claims that Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei received a message from the White House regarding nuclear talks. Responding to the U.S. President Donald Trump's statement, Araghchi clarified that no such message had reached Tehran, adding that Iran, like everyone else, remains in the dark about any U.S. intent to reopen negotiations.
Advantage of our farmers, so that's not going to happen.
Meanwhile, White House National Security Council spokesman Brian Hughes said President Trump remains open to dealing with Tehran either through military means or a nuclear agreement. He added that after Iran rejected the invitation to negotiate, Washington hopes the regime will choose its people over terrorism. Meanwhile, Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Kalibaf responded firmly, saying Tehran won't wait for U.S. messages or negotiate under pressure, warning that forced concessions would only disgrace the nation without easing sanctions.
Some bullying governments insist on negotiation, but their negotiation is not aimed at resolving issues. It's for domination. Their approach is let's negotiation. Their approach is let's negotiate, so we can impose whatever we want on their side sitting across the table. If they accept, great. If they don't, we will stir up a fuss, saying they distance themselves from the negotiation table and walked away from the talks.
In a related move, the Trump administration has decided to end Iraq's exemption to buy electricity from Iran, aiming to cut Tehran's economic lifeline and curb its nuclear ambitions. The U.S. State Department said that the move is part of broader efforts to isolate Iran from the global economy. Iraq, meanwhile, acknowledged temporary operational setbacks, but reaffirmed its commitment to energy self-sufficiency. Advisor to the Iraqi Prime Minister Farhad al-Din stressed that reducing reliance on imports remains a top priority. On the economic front, fears of a global recession are mounting as trade tensions escalate and growth slows. President Trump's push to hike tariffs on major trading partners has sparked criticism, most notably from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Still, there is a faint glimmer of hope, with possible talks on the horizon with Canada and Mexico. Sofian Kenturi has more in this report.
Rising trade tensions and signs of slowing growth are stoking fears that a recession could be just around the corner. President Donald Trump's escalating tariff wars, targeting some of America's biggest trading partners, have rattled markets and heightened uncertainty both at home and abroad. Despite the growing anxiety, President Trump continues to downplay the fallout from his trade policies, brushing off concerns raised by the business community over the economic ripple effects.
Canada has been ripping us off for years on tariffs for lumber and for dairy products. 250%, nobody ever talks about that. 250% tariff, which is taking advantage of our farmers, so that's not going to happen anymore. They'll be met with the exact same tariff unless they drop it.
But many fear the impact will be anything but fair, with tariffs on Canada, Mexico and China sparking fears of rising prices, shrinking exports and potential economic slowdown. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau didn't mince his words, calling Trump's tariffs very dumb and accusing Washington of undermining long-standing alliances while appeasing adversaries.
So today, the United States launched a trade war against Canada, their closest partner and ally, their closest friend. At the same time, they're talking about working positively with Russia, appeasing Vladimir Putin, a lying, murderous dictator. Make that make sense.
In a bid to ease tensions, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick hinted that President Trump could be willing to negotiate a deal with Canada and Mexico, possibly by midweek. Yet with global trade dynamics in flux and uncertainty mounting, the road to economic stability remains murky, and the threat of a downturn continues to cast a long shadow on both sides of the border.
Shifting focus to Russia-Ukraine conflict now. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is heading to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia on Monday for peace talks with Ukrainian officials. The State Department confirmed. His three-day visit aims to push efforts to end the ongoing conflict between Moscow and Kiev. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is also set to arrive in Saudi Arabia on Monday. In Europe, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has confirmed unanimous EU support for the European rearmament program. The move is part of an ambitious €800 billion defense package aimed at bolstering the bloc's ability to face rising security challenges.
They meet, and what is their task? Are they
This week brought unanimous support for Rearm Europe. You're familiar with the €800 billion package for defense, and that is historic. This can be the foundation of a European defense union. We will drive the Rearm Europe plan forward with full force. The idea behind it is we must unleash the full potential in the face of concrete threats.
Von der Leyen also stressed that the EU remains committed to working with the new U.S. administration to bridge political and economic divides, reinforcing transatlantic cooperation, amid growing global challenges. Let's take a listen again.
The United States, they have been for more than 80 years our closest ally. And in the face of adversity, the US and Europe have always been stronger together. And yes, there are differences, but we might have different views on some topics, but if you look at the common interests that we have, they always outweigh our differences. So I think it's important that we work together. We will have our differences. We have to sort them out, but we will have to find common avenues.
Now let's take a quick look at other stories making headlines. Here's a brief roundup.
China's Ministry of Defense announced that China, Russia, and Iran will conduct joint naval drills in the first half of March. The exercises will take off in Iran's Chabahar port, with the drill scheduled for tomorrow Monday, according to the Tasnim news agency.
The Russian Ministry of Defense announced that its forces captured the towns of Lipidivka and Kursk and Novy Nikolai in Sumy. Additionally, Russia's air defense downed around 90 Ukrainian drones over the weekend. Meanwhile, Ukraine's Ministry of Defense reported shooting down 73 out of 119 Russian drones in a recent attack.
Severe snowstorms hit northwest China on Saturday, blocking roads and prompting emergency responses. Authorities imposed traffic controls as snowfall reduced visibility to under 50 meters. Crews worked to clear roads, while police guided vehicles and rescued stranded travelers. Large trucks faced travel restrictions due to hazardous conditions.
New York Governor Kathy Hochul declared a state of emergency on Saturday near the Hamptons after 4 wildfires broke out with no human and material casualties reported. Meanwhile, authorities in several towns closest to the fires have called for locals to evacuate the area.
And finally, on a lighter note, we turn to Yemen now, where the spirit of Ramadan fills the air. Locals are gathering at the historic Grand Mosque of Sana'a, one of the oldest mosques nestled in the heart of the old city, to recite the Quran and take part in cherished traditional activities. Sarah Farjani brings us the story.
Every year during the holy month of Ramadan, the Grand Mosque of Sana'a becomes much more than a place of prayer. It transforms into a spiritual sanctuary where thousands of Yemenis gather to reconnect with faith, devotion, and community. In this sacred space, children sit in circles, learning not only the Holy Quran, but also the values of coexistence, kindness, and respect, essential teachings deeply rooted in the Yemeni culture.
Here young children learn the Quran, along with reading, writing, and arithmetic. The mosque's volunteers are doing a great service, driven by their love for God and their desire to please Him. There is a real sense of love among us here. Anyone who walks into the mosque finds their place. It's a place filled with compassion, faith, and unity.
In one corner, a wise elder with eyes full of warmth and experience gently guides the young into the art of Quranic recitation. This is not just about learning verses by heart, but also about living a life grounded in moral values and spiritual awareness. Meanwhile, the elderly immerse themselves in reading the Quran, taking comfort in the large calligraphic verses that make it easier to follow the sacred words. For many, it is a moment of deep connection and reflection, a way to stay spiritually engaged and pass down their legacy.
The spiritual atmosphere in the Great Mosque, also known as the Sana'a Mosque, is truly unique. It feels as if you are in the Prophet's mosque in Medina or even in Mecca. That same spirit is present here, and that's why people come from villages, towns, and cities all across the region to be part of it.
And in the middle of this spiritual ambience, another tradition comes to life, the application of kuhl, a symbol of purity and beauty in Yemeni culture. With this gesture, men pay tribute to centuries-old customs, honoring both their cultural identity and spiritual heritage. The Grand Mosque of Sana'a stands as a timeless witness to these traditions, offering a haven of peace and devotion during the most sacred month in the Islamic calendar, a place where faith is nurtured, generations connect, and heritage shines brightly.
That's the end of our news program for tonight. Thank you for watching. See you next time.